The storm came through on a Tuesday late, the kind that doesn't announce itself so much as arrive. By morning, it had laid a good part of the ridge over flat, whole stands of it, root plates torn up and standing on end like doors kicked open. And on the north face of Clinch Mountain, down in the low end of a draw, where the road runs out and the crew almost never has a reason to go, one old white oak had finally come down. It had been dying by inches for years. Nobody expected anything from it. It was just going to be another log to step over. But it split when it fell. Not clean. It came apart down the length of the trunk the way a green stick will when you bend it too far, and the whole hollow inside of it lay open to the light for the first time in longer than anyone could say. And the man who found it stood there a while before he understood what he was looking at, because there were bones in it, and there was something else, something above the bones in the grain of the wood itself, that his eye kept trying to read and that he wished afterward he had never let it finish reading. He didn't try to explain it. He called it in, and he stepped back, and he waited. And the whole time he waited, he kept his back to it. He didn't want to keep looking at it, and he didn't want it behind him either. My name is Ryan. Before we go any further, tell me where you're listening from tonight. Leave it down in the comments. I like knowing where all of you are, scattered out there in the dark, all of you listening to the same thing at the same time. And while you're down there, tell me one more thing. Have you ever known a place that everybody quietly stays away from, and only later found out that the staying away is older than anybody who's doing it, that nobody alive can even tell you what started it? Because that's a lot of what this is. That turns out to be most of what this is. This one takes place up on Clinch Mountain in Russell County, Virginia, in the high broken country above Hansonville and Hayter's Gap, where the ridge runs on for miles and the hollows fold in so tight the sun barely finds the bottom of some of them. The bones came out of the ground in our own time, but the story they belong to is from 1931. It's about three sisters named Rasnake, and it's about the fact that when they vanished, almost nobody went looking. If this is the kind of thing you can't put down once you've picked it up, subscribe, because I go looking for these, and I don't often find one that sits this wrong. Stay with me. Let me tell you what came down off that mountain. The man who found it is named on the report, but I'm going to leave his name out of it because he asked me to, and because after we talked, I understood why. He'd worked that management area better than 9 years. He could tell you where every spring on the north face came out of the rock, which of the old logging grades would hold a truck, and which would drop you in the ditch where the copperheads laid up in August. I'll let that stand for the kind of man he is. He went up the morning after the storm to clear the road for the crew, and the road was blocked in 3 places, and the first 2 were easy, and the third was that oak. The heart of it was hollow, and had been a long time, and there was a shape down in the bottom of the hollow that his eye tried 3 or 4 ways to read as something else before it gave up and let him understand it. A person, or what was left of one, folded down into the base of that trunk with the knees drawn up near the chest the way you'd fold yourself into a space too small for you, or the way somebody would fold you if they needed you to fit. The bones had gone the color of the wood around them, that gray weathered oak color, so at first the whole thing read like a knot, a burl, like the tree had just grown strange there. And then, he said, his eye went up. Above the bones, in the inner wall of the open trunk, the wood ran smooth. A long channel of it, worn or grown or eaten into the heartwood, and once he'd caught the length of it, he couldn't stop seeing what the length of it was. A shoulder's worth of swell near the top. A taper down toward where feet would be. Polished looking, the way the inside of an old axe handle goes where a hand has held it 40 years. He stood there and he saw a second body in the shape of the wood, an empty one, a place where a body would lie. And he told me that he knew, even standing there, even with his heart going the way it was, that this was exactly the kind of thing a scared man's eye does. You've done it. Everybody's done it. You find a face in the knots of a pine door. You find a figure in a water stain on a ceiling at 3 a.m. The mind hates a shape it can't finish, so it finishes it, and then it won't give it back. He knew that. He knew it right then. And it didn't help even a little, because the shape was already in him, and it stayed. That's the piece I want you to carry, because it's the hinge the whole thing turns on. He may have been looking at 90 years of weather and rot working a hollow trunk. Water gets in, freezes, splits the grain, whereas a channel over decades that can run smooth as a creek bed. Wood does that. That's ordinary. That's the boring, likely, true, most of the time answer. And he may have been looking at exactly that, and reading a woman into it, because the bones underneath had already told him a woman had been here. I don't know which. He doesn't know which. And the one person who came up that mountain qualified to know wouldn't say, and I'll get to her. And what she wouldn't say is, I've come to think, the most honest thing anybody did in this whole business. Now here's where the name comes back. As soon as word got off the mountain that they'd found bones in the old oak in the low end of that particular draw, it wasn't the sheriff's office that produced a name first. It was the old people. It came up out of Hayter's Gap and Rosedale and up around Hansonville the way these things do. At kitchen tables, one telling another, and the name was Rasnake. the Rasnake sisters. And when the younger ones asked who that was, the old ones went quiet the way they do, and then they said, the ones that lived up on the mountain, the ones that doctored, the ones that went missing way back, and nobody ever knew. Let me tell you who they were, because almost nobody remembers. And because once you understand who they were, you understand why nobody looked. There were three: Virgie, the oldest; Dosha, short for Theodosia; and the youngest, Laney, short for Melanie. Their people had been on that mountain since before the county kept much of anything in writing. And by the part that matters, in the 1920s and on into 1931, the three of them lived together in a cabin up in that high fold, alone, all three grown women, and not one of them married. Their mother had died, their father before that. There'd been brothers, but the brothers went off to the mines or off wherever men went and never came back, and the three sisters just stayed. They kept the ground, and they kept to themselves, and the reason anyone knew them at all, the reason their names didn't fade out completely, is that they doctored. That's the old word for it. They doctored. What it meant is they were what that country used to call granny women, yarb doctors, herb doctors. They knew plants. They knew which root did what, which bark you boiled and which you steeped and which you never touched at all. This was real, and it was common, and up in that part of the mountains in that day, it wasn't strange in the least. There was no doctor closer than Lebanon. And Lebanon in bad weather was a full day off, or worse, and a full day was the difference between a fever that broke and a fever that didn't. So people went up the mountain to the Rasnake sisters. Women went up carrying, and went up when they'd lost what they were carrying. Men went up with a hand gone bad, an axe cut turning, a cough that wouldn't quit. And the sisters gave them something, and mostly people said it worked. Hold on to that. Mostly it worked. That's how they lasted. If it hadn't worked, they'd have been run off the mountain long before. There's another half to that, and the old people are slower to say it, and I only got it in pieces, and I'll give it to you the way I got it. As something people said, not as anything anybody could show me. They said the sisters knew more than plants. They said if you crossed one of them, things went wrong for you. And never right away. That was always the shape of it. Never right away. A man cheats one of them on a trade, and a season later his corn comes in poor, or his cow goes dry, or he takes sick with a thing no yarb will touch. And people would look at each other and not quite say it. That was the reputation. And a reputation like that keeps you safe and damns you in the same motion, because it makes the valley respectful and it makes the valley afraid. And when three women who carry it go quiet all at once, there is a whole valley below them that is, if we're being honest, a little relieved. Now the tree. And I have to be careful here because I've spent enough time with this to know how easy it is to hand a tree a personality it never asked for. So let me keep it to what people actually said and did. That white oak in the low end of the draw had a name. People called it the swallowing oak, or said fast, the swaller tree. And that name is older than the Rasnake sisters by a long way, older than anybody could account for. But when I went looking for the story under the name, for the reason, there wasn't one. That's the thing. There was no famous vanishing, no ghost anybody could describe, no piece of lore with a beginning. There was only the avoidance itself. Men who'd hunted that whole face their entire lives would work the ridge above it and the draws to either side of it, and simply not go down into the low end of that one. And if you asked them why, they didn't have a why. They had a father who told them not to. And that father had a father who told him. The staying away had been handed down intact, with the reason worn off of it. Like a coin passed so long the face has gone smooth. That is the entire reputation of that tree. Not a monster, a habit. A thing a community had agreed to do for so many generations that nobody remembered agreeing. And the Rasnake sisters grew up a quarter mile up the draw from it, and past the mouth of that low end their whole lives, and I don't know what to make of that, and I'm not going to pretend to. I only know the two things sat close on that mountain, the avoided ground and the avoided women, and the old people never talk about them like a coincidence. So, 1931, here's what we can actually say. In the fall of 1931, sometime in October, the three Rasnake sisters stopped coming down off the mountain. And the reason we can put even that much of a date on it comes down to one man, a peddler, and he's the closest thing this story has to a witness. There was a man who ran a route up through those hollows with a wagon, and later a truck, selling what a peddler sold in those days, thread and needles and coffee and lamp oil and patent medicine and whatever else, taking eggs and hides and dried root in trade. His route carried him past the mouth of the Rasnake draw a few times a year, and he'd stop because the sisters traded with him, mostly for salt and coffee, and mostly they paid in bundled root that he'd carry down and sell onto a buyer over in Saltville who dealt in that. This was ordinary. It went on for years. And this man said that the last time he stopped at the Rasnake place was that fall, and that it was wrong before he was off the wagon. The door stood open. Not broken. Open, standing wide, and the fire cold, cold enough he could tell it had been out for days, and everything inside just as it should be. The pots hung up, the beds made, the bundled root still hanging from the rafters. Nothing taken, nothing turned over. And the thing he kept coming back to, the concrete thing, the thing a trader would notice, was the coffee. He'd sold them coffee his last time through, not long before, and there it sat, still tied, never opened. They'd bought coffee and not lived long enough to drink it. He stood in that doorway with a sack of coffee they'd paid him for and would never open, and he did not go in, and he got back on the wagon, and he went down the mountain faster than he'd come up. He told people in the valley, and here is the center of the whole thing, the part with nothing uncanny in it at all, which is somehow worse than any part that has. Nobody went up, not for a long time. 3 women gone off a mountain, their door standing open, their fire dead, and the valley below heard it and did, in any way that counts, nothing. I want to be fair about why. Part of it was the reputation. Most of it was plainer than that, and the plainer part is money and the year. It was 1931. The bottom of the Depression, and up in that country, people were losing their farms, and their kin were going hungry. And every household had an emergency of its own that used up everything it had. 3 grown women who'd chosen to live off alone up in a fold of the ridge, women known to be able to look after themselves, women half the valley was half afraid of. Going quiet for a season did not, at the time, read as an emergency. People assumed. That's what all the old accounts come down to in the end. People assumed the sisters had gone to kin somewhere, assumed they'd finally come down out of that hard country like everyone kept saying they should. Assumed, some of them, and this is the ugly one, that whatever the sisters had gotten into was the sisters' own affair, and that a valley which had been quietly afraid of them for 2 generations was allowed to be quietly glad. So no report got made that fall. There's nothing in the county for that fall. I looked, and I'll tell you what I found, because what I found is its own strange thing. But that fall, officially, nothing happened, because officially nothing had. 3 women simply were, and then simply weren't, and the space they'd stood in closed over like water. Now the beats of how it came apart, because it did come apart, slowly, across the next year, and each thing that surfaced made the last thing worse. The first was the trapper. That winter, a man running a line on the north face came down and said he'd been up near the Rasnake draw, and the cabin was still open, standing open in the snow, and that he'd stepped in out of the cold. The bundled root still hung from the rafters, gone black now, and there was something on the table he didn't care for. 3 cups set out. 3 tin cups, with something dried to a crust in the bottom of each, like 3 cups of tea poured and left. 3 set out and none drunk. And he said the part that turned him wasn't the 3 cups. It was that one of the 3 chairs was pulled back from the table and stood, turned around, turned to face the door, like somebody had been sitting in it watching the door and had gotten up and not pushed it back in. The second beat came that spring. Kin. It turned out the sisters did have people, distant, a cousin's family over toward Tazewell County, and when word finally reached them, one of the men came over and went up the mountain because there was ground involved, and ground was worth something even then. And this man, when he came back down, wouldn't say much. What he did say was that he'd meant to bring the sisters' things down, the few worth bringing, and had found he couldn't make himself stay up there long enough to do it. He said the cabin felt occupied. That's the word that came down. Occupied. He had the whole way through it the sense of being in a house where somebody was home and just in the next room, and that whichever room he stepped into, the somebody had just been in the one he'd left. He came down with nothing. And then he signed the ground over to the county for the back taxes, rather than keep it, which tells you plenty. Because that was good ground, and a man in 1932 did not give away good ground, unless what he was giving away frightened him worse than being poor did. The third beat is the one that finally forced the sister's name into the county record, and it has a bad shape. Late in 1932, a hunter's dog dug something up near the mouth of the draw, down close to the old oak, and it was a shoe. A woman's work shoe, high-topped, the kind those sisters wore with a foot's worth of small bones still inside it, just the one shoe. And that, at last, was a thing you could not assume your way past. A shoe with the bones still in it is not a woman who moved to her kin over in Tazewell, so the county came up. Late 1932, or the very start of 1933, a deputy and a couple of men climbed that mountain and searched. And here is everything they found, and it is almost nothing, and the almost nothing is the whole problem. They found the cabin as everyone had described it. They found the 3 cups, though by then the turned chair had been set back, or had fallen, nobody could say. They dug where the dog had been, down near the oak, and turned up a little more, some scattered bone, too little and too far gone to make anything of, nothing you could put a name to or even a number to. And they found the deputy standing at the foot of that big hollow oak, looking up into the dark of the hollow. and one of his men saying out loud that they ought to look up in the tree, and the deputy would not do it. The account is very plain on this and very strange. He would not put a man up into that tree, he said, and the exact words are gone, so I'm giving you the sense of it, that nothing living was going up in that tree while he had the say of it. And the search ended there. The men went down the mountain, and the case, if you can even call it that, closed by the plain fact of everybody agreeing to stop. 3 sisters, 1 shoe, some bone nobody could count, and a lawman who wouldn't let his own men look inside a tree. That, for 90-some years, is where it sat. Now let me tell you what I found in the records, because I went into them, and they're their own kind of wrong. I went down to Lebanon, to the courthouse, and these old county records are not neat. There are gaps. There are fires in the history of every one of these old courthouses, and plain losses, boxes that got wet, ledgers that walked off, whole years that are simply thin. So I want to be careful and say plainly that some of what I'm about to describe could be ordinary loss. It could be nothing, but it is a particular pattern of nothing. The property record for the Rasnake ground is there. You can follow it back, the sister's father, his father, on back. Then in 1932, it comes over to the county for the taxes from the cousin and stops behaving like a normal parcel. It gets folded into a larger holding, and that holding into another, and eventually into the management area when the state assembled that decades on. And after 1932, the name Rasnake never appears again, which is normal. That's how it works. Except the parcel description, the actual written words that say where the land is, get vaguer every single time it changes hands. The oldest description names the draw, names the spring, names a landmark oak. And each time it's copied forward, that gets sanded down, the same way the reason got worn off the staying away, until by the time the state held it, the words could have meant half the north face. The land got harder to find on paper the longer it sat, and I can show you that in the record. And I do not have an explanation for it, and I'm not going to invent one for you. I tried to run down the people too, and the people are as thin as the paper. The deputy, I could put a name to, but only barely. He left the county the year after the search, and the trail on him ends there. I couldn't find where he went, or when he died, and the one branch of his family I reached didn't want to talk about that year and said so and hung up. The peddler kept no book that survives, and the buyer in Saltville who took the sister's route, if he kept ledgers, they're gone with him. Every thread I pulled came up in my hand with nothing on the end of it. And I want to be honest that thin threads are just what you get with poor people in a poor county 90 years back. It is the most ordinary thing in the world. It only started to feel like something else because there was so much of it, all pointing one way, all of it quiet. And there's one more thing, and it's the thing I keep at the very front of my mind. And I'll give it to you plain. When the deputy's men came off the mountain in 1932 or 1933, somebody wrote up the barest report, a few lines, and it survives. It lists the sisters, Virgie Rasnake, Theodosia Rasnake, and then, where the third name should be, where Laney should be, Melanie, the youngest, there's a name written and then struck through, crossed out, and beside it, another word, and the other word is not a name. As near as anyone can read the old hand, the other word is withdrawn. Just that. Withdrawn, as though somebody had started to enter her among the missing and then stopped, and marked her instead into some other column that the rest of the form doesn't have and never had. Virgie, gone. Dosha, gone. And Laney, withdrawn. I brought the page to the clerk, and I brought it to a historian who has spent her working life in exactly these records. She could tell me the hand was the office hand, the clerk's and not the deputy's, so somebody sat at a desk in that courthouse and wrote it cold, off the mountain, after the fact. She could not tell me what it meant. She said in decades of reading these books, she had never once seen that word used of a person, only of motions and filings and money. It's not a word that belongs on that form at all. Somebody wrote it there anyway, once, and left it and went home. Now come back with me to the present, to the storm, to the oak lying open, because now you know what the man was standing over. He was standing over the answer to a 90-year-old question. And the answer did the thing these answers almost never do. It didn't close anything. It pried the whole business further open, and they got the remains out and got them properly looked at by people who know how. And the first finding was clean, and the second one wasn't a finding at all, which is the point. The clean one, the bones in the base of the tree were a woman's, an adult woman, decades old, right for the era, and whole. That mattered more than I understood at first. She was all there, both feet still with her. And the way she was folded into the bottom of that hollow is not how a body settles on its own. A body that dies in a hollow tree and simply stays does not draw its own knees up under its chin. Somebody folded her. Or she climbed in and drew herself small and waited which is the version I can't get out from behind my eyes and can't defend. And either way, it means the tree did not merely take her. There was an act. There were hands, or there was a decision, and there was a hollow, and a woman ended up at the bottom of it, small. And the second thing, the smooth channel in the wood above her, the shape the man read that first morning and knew even then not to trust. When the state's forensic anthropologist came, I'll tell you what I was doing, because I'm not going to pretend I stood there neutral. I was hoping she'd say it. I wanted her to look at that long, polished channel in the heartwood and tell me it was a mold, that a body had lain there long enough and heavy enough to press its shape into living wood that then healed around the absence and kept it. I wanted the second body. Anybody standing there wanted the second body, because the second body finishes the shape the way your mind finishes the face and the door. And she looked at it a long time, and she went quiet. And then she did her job, which was to not give me what I wanted. She measured the wear as wear. Water, freeze, decades, rot, working the grain of a hollow trunk, a channel that runs smooth the way a channel runs smooth. She would not call it a mold. She wouldn't be led toward it, and she wouldn't be led away from it either. She declined to name a thing she couldn't stand behind. I've turned that over a lot since, because at the time it frustrated me, and now I think her refusal is the truest thing anybody did in 90 years of this case. The shape is only a second body if you put a second body there. She wouldn't. And that leaves it exactly where it belongs, which is in the eye of whoever's looking. Mine. And I'm sorry to say, now yours. So set the wood aside. Let it be weather. We are left with one woman, whole, folded into the base of that tree by something with hands, decades ago. And because she was whole, both feet still with her, the single shoe the dog turned up down by the mouth of the draw, with its own foot's worth of bone inside it, was another woman. The anthropologist would go that far and no further, and that far is enough. At the least, two. 2 women placed in death on that mountain. Virgie and Dosha, most likely, though nobody can tell you which is which. And there were 3. Laney is not the woman in the tree, and Laney is not the shoe, and Laney is the youngest. And Laney is the one whose name the office started to write among the missing, and then crossed out and marked instead, withdrawn. I can give you 2 readings of that, and I've tried for a third that's kinder, and there isn't one, and both are worse than any tree. Either she folded her sisters, one into the ground, and one into the hollow of the oak in the low end of the draw. The one place on that whole mountain a body could be left where the valley had already spent generations refusing to look. And then she withdrew, and no one ever went after her, because no one was even looking. Or she was taken the same as they were, and she is out there still in that ground. Under 90 years of hunters and loggers and men clearing a road after a storm, all of them walking over her without the first idea. I don't know which. And the deeper I went, the less it felt like the record had failed, and the more it felt like the record had flinched. A deputy who wouldn't look at a tree, a cousin who gave away good land rather than clean out a cabin, a parcel that got harder to find on paper every year it changed hands, a whole valley that heard 3 women were gone and agreed, without ever once holding a meeting about it to let them stay gone. All of it handled quietly over a lot of years by a lot of ordinary, decent people, each doing one small, careful thing. And then I went up the mountain myself. There's a flat where the cabin stood, and you can still see the cornerstones and the caved-in square of a root cellar, and a spring that runs cold and clear out of the rock the way it must have run for those 3 women every morning of their lives. It's a beautiful place. I want that on the record. It isn't a dark hollow full of dread. It's a high green fold with good water and a long look down toward the Clinch. And standing there, you understand exactly why they stayed. The man who took me up would not go down to the low end where the oak had been. He stopped at the cabin flat. When I went on down, he stayed put, and when I came back, he didn't ask what I'd seen. He said his daddy had told him you don't go down in that end of the draw, and that he never had, and didn't figure to start on my account. And I noticed, walking out, only really noticed it later, that the 2 of us had timed it, without a word passing between us, to be off that ground and back to the truck before the light went. I keep meaning to go back up. I keep not going. Virgie, gone. Dosha, gone. And the youngest, marked once in an office hand, with a word that isn't for the dead and has never been explained. I asked you at the start where you were listening from, and you told me, and that was a nice moment, and none of us has asked about her since.